It doesn't matter. Yeah, I guess you can ask me questions,
Okay,
during. That's fine.
so that's fine. You can put them in the chat box, and that's an easy way for us to do it. And then we can also afterwards discuss. So if you are a guest attending today, if you could mute yourself for now during the presentation and then put something in the chat box, or if we go ahead, say go ahead, I'll be watching it. Gina Goggio and Senior Helpers is our sponsor today. So Gina, tell us a little bit about your company. And I'm sorry, I didn't mention that we are mainstreaming live on Facebook and we are recording this as well. Gina, go ahead. Thank you.
My name is, thank you, Carol. My name is Gina Goggio, and I'm from Senior Helpers. We offer in-home non-medical care. So we are that companion service when you need an extra set of eyes or hands for your loved one. We offer in 24-hour, hourly, and overnight care. We also service veterans. Thanks, Carol, and I'm glad to be here, and it's wonderful to hear Mary Kay talk always. So
thank you. We appreciate it. Mary Kay is also, as well as Senior Partners, Mary Kay and her staff are very trusted, wonderful partners of ElderWorks who deal with many of our clients. We work together to assist them and always have great trust in sending them to Mary Kay for assistance. So Mary Kay, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, which is always interesting, as I know. And we'll look forward to hearing your presentation. Thank you. And I'll be watching the chat box as the presentation starts.
Thank you, Carol. It's always wonderful to be a part of any of your presentations. You do a wonderful job in educating the community. And I also have an opportunity to work quite oftenly with Gina Goggio and Senior Helpers, and they have been a wonderful service to many of our clients also. I'm an elder law attorney practicing. I'm the founding attorney of AZ Health and Elder Law, which is a life care planning law firm. And what that means is that, as in addition to doing estate planning, we do Medicaid, Medicare issues, and we also then do care coordination. I was a former nurse, so I, with my nursing and my legal background, and then I also have a social worker who has a specialty or has been trained in dealing with behavioral health issues. So it comes in really handy when we work with our clients in a lot of the situations that they're going to be faced with, as they're either caring for a husband or a wife, or a son or daughter, are caring for mom or dad. So with that, I'm gonna like to get started. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And today we're gonna talk about, so I have up on the screen there, we have our sponsors. And again, thank you to Senior Helpers and to ElderWorks for sponsoring today's conversation. I was excited when they asked me to talk about this topic, because it tends to be one that I think is very important. And as attorneys, sometimes we touch on it, but sometimes don't always get into, as we like to say, the weeds with it. But today we're going to do a little bit of that. So National Healthcare Decision Day happens annually every year on April 16th. This is a day to inspire, educate, empower both clinicians and individuals about advanced care planning. It's a day to highlight the importance of advanced care planning, having the conversation, and that's why it's called the Conversation Project, pretty much. It involves choosing a healthcare agent, and then truly reflecting on your goals and your values when making future healthcare decisions, if you're in the situation of where you would not be able to speak for yourself. National Healthcare Decision Day exists to inspire, educate, and empower the public, and also the providers about the importance of advanced care planning. It's an initiative of the Institute of Healthcare Improvement, which is a not-for-profit organization, which is a leader in health and healthcare improvement worldwide. If there's one thing that we have learned from this past year, it's to prepare for the unexpected. With well over 500,000 deaths in the United States alone, it's not just the elderly and the seriously ill who have succumbed to the infection. There are been ever various ages. There were and continue to be many seemingly healthy younger individuals who found themselves admitted to the hospital, and unfortunately, some ultimately did die. This serves as a reminder to all of us that we all need to have these conversations and to have our care plans in place. I think we can all recognize that talking about death is uncomfortable. And while it may be uncomfortable, it is necessary to have this conversation. And it's important for individuals to have with your family and your loved ones. It's also an important conversation to have with your healthcare providers. While most people would like for the providers to start this conversation, unfortunately, the reality is that about 85% of adults 65 and over have not had an advanced care conversation with a physician. And while there are many that are trying to change this and increase the comfort level and make it easier for clinicians to engage in these conversations, we are still years away from normalizing this conversation between the providers and the patients. I'd like to share with you a clip.
I started a conversation project while I was going through my own last years, months, days of life. We had never talked about her wishes for end-of-life care. From time to time, she would say something like, if I'm ever like that, pull the plug. But of course, when she became ill, there was no plug to pull. And also my mother had dementia at the end, so we were not able to have any conversation about what her wishes were. So I was her healthcare decision maker. And in the last months, years really, I had a cascading number of decisions to make for which I assure you I was totally unprepared and in fact blindsided. What I learned from the experience of talking about my mother's end of life is that guess what? This experience is far too common. Far too many of the people we love are not dying in the way that they would choose. Far too many of their survivors are left guilty, depressed, uncertain about whether they have done the right thing. 70% of people say they want to die at home, and 70% of people are dying in hospitals and institutions. That's just a huge disconnect between what people wish and what happens. We can change that. That's why the Conversation Project emphasizes having a talk about values, about what matters to you, not what's the matter with you, but what matters to you and what's important for you to think about at the end of their life. Are you a person who wants all the information, or do you want just enough? Are you someone who is going to make all decisions for yourself, or do you want your family to be involved? What's important to you at the end of life? Then you've given them a real staff, a guide. We started the Conversation Project with just a small group of people around a table. When we sat down, we brought in experts in the field, and it was the experts in the field who told us that if we're going to change the way people die in America, we have to go outside the medical system and change the cultural norm from not talking about what we wanted at the end of life to talking about it. One of the things that the conversation does is tell your parents that you're going to be there for them, that you're not going to leave them isolated in the hands of strictly medical people. The medical community is just beginning to be conversation ready. A generation ago, we transformed how people were born. It was not the medical profession that said, come into the hospital with your video camera, let's have a baby in a bathtub, and don't all the husbands want to come into the birthing room? It was not, I assure you. Birth is a human experience, not just a medical experience. And part of what we're doing in talking with people is recapturing, saying, dying is part of the human experience. It's part of a natural progression in life. We have the capacity to transform how people die in this country. I think everybody does have an idea of what a good death would be. When you ask people, the word that comes up the most is peaceful. The Conversation Project is very much about connecting. It's about sharing, and it's about being open and loving to each other through a very difficult journey.
Not going forward on me. Oh my goodness. Are we, okay. Whoops. Pardon me, trying to get back onto my, it's not paging for me. It's not advancing.
Why don't you
That's
just
my-
reload it? Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
There you go.
There we go. Okay. Can you see that now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that, a little technical problem there. So just as we create estate plans for our eventual demise, we also need to plan ahead for the possibility that we will become sick and unable to make our own medical decisions. And as we know, medical science has created many miracles, among them the technology to keep patients alive longer, sometimes indefinitely. As a result, many well-publicized right-to-die cases, states have made it possible for individuals to give detailed instructions regarding the kind of care they would like to receive should they become terminally ill or are in a permanently unconscious state. And these instructions generally fall under the category of end-of-life care decision-making. And depending on the state in which you live, this may take the form of a healthcare proxy, a medical directive, a living will. And in Illinois, we use a combination. And I bring that up is because I do know a lot of us travel. Sometimes we travel half and half. Illinois is well known for our snowbirds and traveling to Arizona and what have you. So I know that that's something that's can kind of come up sometimes in our conversations. So let's look through some of the documents just briefly. I know you probably, if you were in the previous one, some of these documents were talked about. I want to focus really more on the healthcare ones. So if we're looking at the healthcare power of attorney, that's a document where we name an individual. So if you become incapacitated, they have the legal authority to make your healthcare decisions for you. And it's a document that you need to execute while you're competent. It's not something that can be done afterwards. And that's a point I really want people to remember. That's why it's so important to do it beforehand. And it's especially important to have it if an individual or a family member, if there's going to be some disagreement about treatment. So again, it's really important to have that person specifically identified who the healthcare providers can go to, that they're going to feel comfortable having, that they have the legal authority to make those decisions. In general, the healthcare directive only takes effect when the person requires medical treatment and the physician determines that that person is unable to communicate his or her wishes concerning treatment. And again, how this works really depends on the laws in the particular states. And sometimes I know that can be sort of a gray area sometimes. And I know we spend some time with our care partners, helping them to sort of figure out sometimes really who is in control and when we're at decision-making times in our lives. Since the agent will have the authority to make the medical decisions in the event the principal is unable to make them, the agent should be a family member or a friend that the person trusts and trust them to follow their instructions. If you have been very explicit about not wanting certain treatments, it's important that that agent's going to be able to step forward and say, no, that's not what they want. I know, even though we can do it, I know that that's not something he or she would have wanted. Once the healthcare proxy is drawn up, it's important that you keep the original. You should have a copy, and then the physician, your principal physician, your primary care provider should also keep a copy and have a copy in your medical record. Those interested in drawing up a healthcare proxy should, I would say, work with an attorney who is skilled in doing and working with these healthcare proxies so that they understand and are able to communicate, make sure that they get those wishes documented appropriately. And then also accompanying the healthcare directives, we also have the living will. And the living will is something that is a specific document that gives instructions regarding treatment if the individual becomes terminally ill or is in a persistent vegetative state. So it's a little bit narrowed as to what it really covers. So those, it really gives and it expresses an intent. It's a way for you to express your intent in a very limited situation as to what you will or will not want, you would or would not want done. It simply dictates the withdrawal of life support in the instances of a terminal illness, coma, or a vegetative state. One of the things that's important is not to confuse the living will with a DNR. I hear a lot of times people will tell me, yeah, I have a DNR, and thinking that that's what the living will is, and it's not. A DNR says that if you're having a medical emergency, such as a heart attack or a stroke, medical professionals will not try to revive you. It's very different from a living will, which only goes into effect if you are in a vegetative state. So everyone can basically benefit from the living will, while the DNRs are only for usually specific situations, very elderly, frail patients, someone very near the end of life, and again, someone who it would make sense not to administer the CPR. Another document that's important now, the advanced directives that attorneys do, or medical directives as they're called in some other states, are essentially the powers of attorney for property, the living wills. We also do the HIPAA authorizations, and those are the documents that allows the people that you have named in your powers of attorney for healthcare to gain access to your medical records should they need to make decisions or have information that they need in order to make those decisions. Another advanced directive that provides general guidance on what type of care you would want, it's an alternative that has emerged in sort of a growth out of, I like to refer to it sometimes as the DNR on steroids, because it sort of is an outgrowth of that principle. It's an actual document. It's in about 38 states, most commonly referred to as a physician's order for life-sustaining treatment. People now refer to, a lot of times will say, I have a DNR, and when I ask them to show it, this is actually what they're showing me, and not really quite understanding that essentially that's exactly what it is. So if you have something like that, you might want to take a look at it, because you might have a pulse and not even realize that that's in fact what it's being called. It's a standardized medical form, and it indicates which types of life-sustaining treatment you would or would not want if your condition worsens. So when we prepare your estate plan, we try to capture, what I mean is we as attorneys try to capture your wishes as thoroughly and as precisely as possible. It can be a challenge, though, to cover every variable. You may also have preferences that are hard to capture in the legal language of trust, wills, and powers of attorney. That's why we always encourage clients to talk. Typically, in the event of hospitalization, the hospitalized person would complete medical powers of attorney and living wills upon being admitted to the hospital. So be careful sometimes, because sometimes the staff may go ahead and offer for these to be prepared, and not knowing that you may already have them prepared. So just be aware of that, because it's under federal law, the hospitals are required during the admissions process to include asking you whether or not you have a living will or a medical power of attorney. Of course, they're not required to have them to be admitted, but it is part of the admission process, and that's why some hospitals have come to just part of their admission process offer them at that time. So for routine admissions, when you're going in for a planned surgery or a planned procedure, that, the process works fairly well. But one of the things that's important is that these documents are available in emergency. And I think the COVID-19 was a very poignant, recent experience that we've all had and have watched as some of these, some of people have ended up in the hospital in a very emergency situation and may not have had these documents, with them or had them prepared. So while most states have medical proxy process to cover such situations, more often than not, the family members have little or no idea of what the critically ill loved one wishes for their medical treatment. So having a sometimes difficult but nevertheless important conversation with your loved ones can help with this problem. Living wills and other advanced directives are written. They're legal instructions regarding your preferences for medical care if you are unable to make decisions for yourself. They help guide the doctors and the caregivers if you're terminally ill, seriously injured, in a coma, in the late stages of dementia, or near the end of life. They're not just, though, for older adults. There can be unexpected end of life. The situations can happen to anyone at any time. So it's important for all adults to prepare these documents. And seriously, when I say all adults, I really mean, remember, after the age of 18, at the age of 18, as a matter of fact, we're considered adults. So at the very minimum, at the age of 18, this is something that should be prepared, especially if we have kids going off to college. I always, sort of mention that to my clientele. So by planning ahead, you can get the medical care you want, avoid unnecessary suffering, and hopefully relieve the caregiver's stress and anxiety of the decision-making burdens, that come at the time of crisis and grief. You also help reduce the confusion or the disagreement about the choices you want people to make on your behalf. Having that conversation in front of people, it gets it out there. People hear it. It's not just something that, is not been talked about, and no one knows what your wishes will be. With COVID-19, being highly contagious, medical isolation has been routinely practiced, and it made it extremely difficult to execute medical directives once the COVID-19 patient was admitted to the hospital. So there was an attempt at that time to have remote executions of the documents, notarized procedures for advanced directives, and then waivers of some of the execution formalities. However, remember, the best solution remains having completed such documents in advance without the added stress and the urgency of the emergency hospital admission. So what should you do? Well, basically the steps are fairly simple. You complete the medical power of attorney, which again authorizes a medical power of attorney, the agent, to make the medical decisions on your behalf, the principal, in the event you're not able to make your own medical decisions due to your own medical distress or your medical incapacity. You should also, in addition to appointing the initial agent, appoint a successor or an alternative agent, because sometimes the primary choice may not always be available. And that's, again, another reason to sometimes keep them very updated, just because that person may not be around. So such a document can provide as much specific information, medical information, as you wish, or it can be fairly simple, authorizing the agent to make the decisions for you. So this is a conversation that can be as specific or really as general as you want it. But remember, the more specific you make it, the easier the decisions are going to be for your agent. So let's talk a little bit about choosing that person. Even if you have other legal documents regarding your care, not all situations can be anticipated, and some situations will require someone to either make a judgment about what your likely care wishes would be. So you should choose a person who meets the following criteria. Meet your state requirements for a healthcare agent. So in Illinois, that has to be somebody over the age of 18 or older, is not your doctor or part of your medical team, is willing and able to discuss medical care and end of life issues with you. And that's an important one. Sometimes not everyone is comfortable having that conversation. So we want to make sure that the person we're choosing can have that conversation and be comfortable with making those decisions, and that they can be trusted to make those decisions that adhere to your wishes and values, and that also can be trusted to be your advocate if there's disagreement about your care. So if there's going to be some family discourse, you want to make sure that that person is able to be your advocate and stand up for the decisions that you have wanted. That person you name could be your spouse, it can be family members, it could be a friend, it could be a member of your faith community. You may also choose one or more alternates in case the person like I said before, is unable to fulfill the role. So again, sometimes it's hard to come up with one, let alone two or three people that we can name in those documents. And remember that the living will is a written, and you want to make sure that it explains it sets forth very specifically, that you don't want to have life-sustaining or heroic measures in a particular situation. So again, it's sort of when you think about doing the living will, these are some things that you might want to consider. How important it is for you to be independent and self-sufficient. Identify what circumstances might make you feel like your life is not worth living. Would you want treatment to extend your life in any situation? All situations. Would you want treatment only if a cure is possible? So these are all the kinds of questions that you want to ask yourself, answer, and write them down, so that these are the types of answers that you can give. This is the kind of dialogue that you can have with your agent and your family members as you're having these conversations. So starting a discussion can understandably be very difficult for some. Having a neutral party to facilitate the discussion can be helpful. I've been a part of many of these discussions, not only as a elder law practicing attorney, but also as a neurosurge ICU practicing nurse. I've been on that side of the bedside. I've been with families. And I can tell you, it's a conversation sometimes that you wished had been had beforehand. But again, sometimes it is nice to have that neutral party there to help facilitate. Because a medical or legal professional who deals with this subject, we can provide informed input into the conversation, and they may be available to provide information and guidance. For example, when we talk about some of the upcoming issues in the upcoming slides, as we talk about some of the treatments, it's helpful to maybe have that medical professional involved in that, so they can give you some really good factual information and information as it pertains to your loved one. So the discussion really needs to be between the individual, your family, and the medical agent. So it's kind of a three-pronged kind of conversation that needs to be had, because it involves highly personal decisions and beliefs concerning end-of-life questions. And as we've seen, COVID-19 has placed many families in the difficult position concerning when to let go of the COVID-19 patient. Unfortunately, is usually in a situation where the family cannot physically be present with the COVID-19 victim, and where the patient is beyond the point where they can assist the decision-making process by providing input. If COVID has taught us nothing, that has been nothing but the perfect storm for a situation of where someone has not made these healthcare powers, have not done the documents, and have not had the conversation. By having such discussion in advance of such an emergency, the family is provided with the solace that what they are advising the medical professionals is consistent with the patient's known wishes and beliefs. And if we don't make them known by having these conversations, they're not going to be known. So let's talk about some of the things that we maybe should be talking about, as it relates to care. I know sometimes people can be very, uh, when they talk about what they see themselves towards the end of life, but when we get down to the actual physical equipment, the physical environment of the hospital, these are the pieces, these are the parts that we need to have a little bit of understanding about what they really entail, because a lot of times these are the questions that the healthcare providers are going to be turning to us and asking us. Well, do you want CPR? Do you want, and they go into their basic lingo, and we just stand there, basically batting our eyes because we don't really have a clue as to what maybe all of this really means. Not only that, is if we do it, is it really, what's the end result? There's, for example, in cardiopulmonary resuscitation, this is going to restart the heart when it has stopped beating. So it's important to determine if and when you would want to be resuscitated by CPR or by a device that delivers an electrical shock to stimulate the heart. And then you're going to want to ask, given my particular disease or situation, what's the quality of my life going to be after that? Because the reality of CPR is, most times it's not what we see on TV. We're not having CPR in the morning and having lunch at noon. That's not quite the reality, but that is what we see a lot of times on TV. And then when we look at mechanical ventilation, this essentially takes over your breathing. So again, you're going to want to consider if and when, for how long you would want to be placed on a mechanical ventilator. Now, this is something that's been quite interesting in my conversations with several of my clients. In the past, quite honestly, people would say, no, I would not want this. But given the recent COVID-19 situation of where it was something that was definitely needed, and part of the treatment, where sometimes that you would not consider something like this to be part of the normal treatment of a disease. So again, this is something that's really, I think, important to talk about when we, that's just a perfect example of where just kind of broadly talking about a particular device or mode of treatment has to be kind of talked about in a little bit further detail. Tube feeding. This is where it supplies the body with nutrients and fluids, either IV or via tube in the stomach. So you would want to decide if and when and for how long you will want to be fed in this manner. And this again involves inserting a tube into the stomach, and how long for. So that's another one that's a very important one to think about. Another important one is dialysis. This is where when our kidneys stop functioning and there needs to be the removal of waste from the blood, again, determine if and when and for how long you would want to receive this treatment. So again, you can see where it's almost like you're going through a 3-part with each one of these types of treatments. Antibiotics or antiviral medications can be used to treat many infections. If you were near the end of life, would you want your infections to be treated aggressively, or would you rather let the infection just run its course? And then comfort care and palliative care. This can include any number of interventions that may be used to keep you comfortable and manage pain while you're, abiding by your other treatment wishes. This may include being allowed to die at home, getting pain medications, being fed ice chips to soothe mouth dryness, and also avoiding some of these invasive tests or treatments. And then the last one is the organ and not the last one, but organ and tissue donation. I had dealt a lot with this. This can, for transplantation, it can be specified in your powers of attorney for healthcare. If your organs are removed for donation, you will be kept on life-sustaining treatment temporarily until the procedure is completed. So to help your healthcare agent avoid any confusion, you may want to state in your healthcare power of attorney that you understand that the need for this temporary intervention. So again, something to sort of be aware of, where we would want to be consistent in our documentation and in our communication being aware of how these processes actually happen in the hospitals. Another one too is donating your body for specific study, also can be specified. And when I have someone that's interested in doing this, I advise them to contact, there are organizations or the local medical school or the university for the donation program. They would have information on how to register for a planned donation for research. So again, that would be something that you definitely would want to be planning ahead for and make sure that you have all the proper and necessary documentation. You don't need to have an advance directive or a living will to have a do not resuscitate or a do not intubate orders. To establish a DNR or a DNI order, tell your doctor about your preferences. They'll write it in the orders and put them in your medical record. And even if you already have a living will that includes your preferences regarding resuscitation and intubation, it's still a good idea to establish a DNR or a DNI orders each time you're admitted to a new hospital or a healthcare facility. Don't always assume that even though it was been maybe in your record, that it's in your record. There's a lot of things sometimes that go on with transferring of medical records and things of whatnot. So we just want to make sure that that the document is in our records. And remember, advance directives need to be in writing, especially for those of you that travel. Each state has different forms and requirements for creating these documents. And depending on where you live, the form may need to be signed by a witness or notarized. So again, it's helpful to ask your lawyer to kind of help you with some of this. There are links to state-specific forms. They can be found on websites of various organizations, such as the American Bar Association, AARP, and the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization. And it's important to review your advance directives with your doctor and your healthcare agent to be sure you filled out the forms correctly. And again, keep the originals in a safe but easily accessible place. Get a copy to your doctor. Give a copy to your healthcare agent and any of the other healthcare agents. And remember, keep a record of who has these advance directives. Talk to your family members and other important people in your life about your advance directives and your healthcare wishes, and also carry a wallet-sized card that indicates that you have them and identifies your agent and states where the copy can be kept. And then again, keep a copy when you're traveling. One practical step that families can take in advance is also to prepare what I call a hospital go kit. In this kit, the individual, you can place your useful documents and other necessary items so that in the event that you do need to be admitted to the hospital intensive care unit or through the emergency room, those items are gathered in advance of need. So they're, good to go. Certainly, you'd want to keep the copies of the medical power of attorney and the living will should be included in this kit. Using the kit to keep other medical information is useful as well. Medical insurance information, including your provider, your account numbers, your contact information, especially during the admission process, because you're often going to be asked that information probably more than once. And it's probably something, unless you have it ready and willing to go, when you're in a rush, you're probably going to forget to grab it or may not have it. Another thing that's important is a list of medications that you need, including the name of the medications, the dosage, the frequency, and then again, really important, anything you're allergic to. Contact information for relatives, all of the doctor's information, and maybe also too, if you're close to your faith community, maybe your minister or someone that you feel that you would want to be a part or to visit or to know. Practical things would be maybe glasses and hearing aids. So just a little something to think about. One thing you should remember too is that you can change your directives at any time. If you want to make changes, you have to create a new one. Don't write on the one you have. And then you're going to have to redistribute the new ones, destroying the old ones. And then the specific requirements, again, remember, may change in different states. You should discuss changes with your primary care doctor and make sure a new directive replaces the old one in their file. Make sure it's in the chart. Again, also maybe talk to the family and friends and let them know. One of a couple of situations that it's time or you should consider reviewing your directives and maybe creating new ones are if you've been diagnosed with a new diagnosis. The diagnosis is maybe a terminal or a disease that will significantly alter your life, and you may think about making some changes. Again, you'd want to discuss with your doctor the kind of treatment and the care decisions that might be made during this, depending on how this disease is going to progress. You would want to make sure that your choices go along with that. If you've had a change in marital status, this is something that people are not quite aware of, that once you're divorced, that those agents that you've named under there are no longer applicable. So again, if you marry, divorce, separated, widow, those are times to make sure that you create a new one. And then another thing that is important is about every 10 years, or maybe sometimes even sooner, your thoughts about end of life care may change. And that's again where you would want to make sure you review your directives from time to time and make sure that they reflect your current values and your wishes. In some states, advanced healthcare planning includes, as I said before, this document called the PULSE. As I said, it talks about very specific things, and it may include resuscitation, mechanical ventilation, tube feeding, the use of antibiotics, requests not to transfer to an emergency room, pardon me, requests not to be admitted to the hospital, pain management. So all those kinds of things that we sort of talked about previously, that's one of the things, those are the things that this document are going to specifically address. And remember that, like the advanced directives, the powers of attorney, the living will, the PULSE can also be canceled and updated. So again, it is also something to make sure that you keep updated as your disease may or may not progress. And I'm just above there on this, that I wanted to give you an idea of this is exactly what it looks like for the state of Illinois. And it's available if you go on to the www.dph.illinois.gov. It's the Department of Public Health. If you Google Department of Public Health, or even if you Google Post, you're going to be able to find it. And it's downloadable from their website. One of the things that was interesting when I was preparing for this presentation, recent studies finds that when the medical personnel know what kind of care a patient wants at the end of life, that Medicare can be spared, significant sums, and the patient is more likely to die at home rather than in a hospital, at least in certain areas. And this study, which was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, found that in regions of the United States that tend to spend the most on end-of-life care, patients who have advanced directives cost Medicare about $5,600 less per person. So again, I know we're looking at this from a dollars spent per case, but quite honestly, that's really the way that these statistics, or the way to kind of study this issue is by looking at Medicare dollars and Medicare data, because that's essentially who keeps tabs on most of this. And it was interesting because in the study, this patient's quality of life also appeared to be better. They were more likely to receive hospice care and to be at home when they died. But the differences in spending and care did not hold up in regions of the country where low to average end-of-life expenditures. The researchers speculated that in these areas, less aggressive care at the end of life is already the norm and more in line with what many patients want. That was kind of interesting. In high-spending regions, by contrast, an advanced directive may embolden caregivers to go against the local norm of aggressive treatment and prolonged hospital care. Most participants in the study who had advanced directives specified that they wanted to limit treatment. What I think this study does is it absolutely highlights some of the reasons why you should both talk to family, friends, and physicians about the type of care you might want to receive. again, should you be unable to make your own decisions. And also another related study just published in the medical journal, The Lancet, has found that nearly 1 of every 3 Medicare beneficiaries had an operation in their last year of life. And operations were more likely in regions with a greater availability of hospital beds and higher levels of Medicare spending. But the higher rates of surgery didn't necessarily pay off. The regions where doctors were more likely to operate had higher patient death rates. So it's interesting that this level of surgical intensity doesn't seem to be having much in the way of benefits for the population. One sense is that there are probably lots of unnecessary procedures that go on at the end of life. I just thought I'd share those with you. Thought they were rather interesting. So while these are difficult and sometimes confusing conversations, there are many resources available. And here's a few I would recommend to help both you and your family with advanced care planning, including there's education, conducting conversations, and as well as documenting what your care preferences are. The Prepare for Your Care is an evidence-based outline resource that's used to begin the process. It has a lot of tools available. There's also the 5 wishes, which this is, it's an approach for individuals. It offers an approach for you to talk about advanced care planning with your loved ones and your healthcare providers. And then you can document these care preferences through an advanced care directive. They also have comprehensive programs and resources that are available for healthcare providers and also for business sectors and community organizations. And I know I've done 1 or 2 of these with organizations when they've decided they wanted to do that. The Conversation Project, which is a lot of the resources or is what I've been introducing to you today. This organization is actually responsible for the National Healthcare Decision Day, which is April 16th, celebrated every year. It offers free conversation guides to help you have the conversation about your end-of-life preferences. They also offer references to help caregivers navigate these important conversations for those that they're caring for. And then the last one there is was created by a palliative care team to support clinicians engage their patients in conversations about their illness. So again, kind of from a different perspective, but also for those out there that might be looking for additional resources. Whoops, I'm sorry. We'll get on to the next one. Oh, there we go. So one of the hardest things for a family to accept and understand is when a loved one quits eating and drinking near end of life. You know, families often don't know exactly what is happening to the person who is dying. You know, they start questioning, is my loved one dehydrated? Are they starving? Another issue is how to recognize and cope with anxiety. People who are in their final stage of life and their loved ones face, again, there's so many challenges. And anxiety is often one of these challenges during this last phase of life. And it's natural for people to feel anxious because of the uncertainty or the fear of dying. And then the other one too is what is estate planning and why does it matter? Again, estate planning helps you manage and document many important decisions to ensure that your wishes are carried out after your death, including the wishes for your finances, your healthcare, and your property. Sometimes it may seem daunting, but it's a worthwhile process that can make life easier for you and your loved ones. And again, there's a resource website that I put at the bottom of the slide that addresses some of these questions that we just sort of talked about right there. And then what I wanted to do is share with you one final video that I thought did a really nice job.
And finally tonight, ABC News wants to join you in something right at the heart of the American family. How we can all help the people who care about us make decisions near the end of our lives. And 9 out of 10 of you have told us that we should all be talking about it at all ages, what we want. And yet only a fraction of us have done it. And we know it makes a huge difference in the health of the caregiver as well as those cared for. So ABC News has taken cameras inside a vital, loving family, part of a new community, deciding to have the conversation. This is 85-year-old Norb and his daughter Maureen.
My dad is 85 today. He's still very, very active. He's a wonderful friend.
Throughout life, daughter and father have always talked about everything, except one thing: how to control the end of your life in the same way you control the prime of your life. So dad and daughter gather the family together, 3 generations, for an act of love.
And so now we're just asking that you share some of your thoughts about what you would like at the end of your life, so that we can honor your wishes.
They are part of something new underway for families in America that says having the conversation is a gift parents and children give each other. And there's proof of the difference it makes. Studies show depression rates plummet after a loss if the families have had the conversation. Renowned physician Dr. Atul Gawande says doctors and nurses see it firsthand.
When you're there in that moment and you're talking to the family and you're saying, how much will it bother your father if he ends up this way? And they say, more often than not, I don't know. We never talked about it. That it is incredibly traumatic for the family, for the doctors involved. There's often conflict. It can tear families apart.
So Dr. Gawande has become part of a team led by Pulitzer Prize-winning writer Ellen Goodman. It is called the Conversation Project. It is a kind of guide for families looking for a way to begin.
If we give them a way to talk about it and give people something to hang on to when they're afraid to start this conversation, they can do it and pass it on.
Families like the Jennings. They looked over the conversation guide before they sat down together. First, there's laughter.
Oh, my golf swing's still good.
And then Dad directly eases his daughter's guilt and worry about having put their mother in hospice.
I felt like that meant we were giving up on Mom.
She was in a lot of pain, and I think it was handled real well.
And next, Maureen asks her dad for clarity on what he considers a good end to a great life.
So if you were in a condition where you couldn't make decisions for yourself, how extreme would you want us to take measures to save your life versus letting you go?
Well, I think I'm ready to go anytime. You know, I wouldn't prolong anything. I mean, I've lived a great life. Pretty lucky. And because of you guys, you know. And
unexpectedly, a grandson is inspired to speak up about his own wishes for his own life.
That if there was no meaningful communication, that I would want you to stop trying to intervene.
we aren't ready for you to go that soon.
Well, we're not ready for you to go that soon either, so.
And one by one, the others weigh in, all ages.
Don't do that.
Happy birthday, dear Grandma.
And with that, another family has joined a kind of estate planning for the heart. The conversation beginning in America. So please tell us your stories in the days ahead about ways to begin the conversation with family members of all ages. Or if you don't want to have it, tell us about that too. My colleague and my friend, anchor Bill Ritter from WABC, and I will be reading your emails and looking at the great photos you're already sending us of your families. So go to abcnews.com, find the conversation and the guide, and we'll be seeing you right there.
All right. I'm available for questions.
We don't have any yet, but I feel that we may in a moment. You also mentioned, thank you very much. That was very interesting. And I love that last video, which I think convinces all of us that we could have that conversation if we've not. You did mention the 5 wishes is one of the options to be sort of questions end of life. And I find that very helpful. I have a lot of clients that used it, and my family personally had used it. And it kind of lets you know what your loved one really does want to have. And there's several questions in there. And I think if, like everyone, as they said, if you have a little bit of humor with it as well, which happened in my family. But when my parents passed, we knew exactly what they wanted. So I thought we were very, very fortunate about that. I see we do have something. Let's see. What is the state of Illinois responsibility law? We are there physically, mentally, and emotionally, but we're getting up there also and have limited funds.
I think the question was in response to, yes, it's totally off subject, but I think the question was for family responsibility for paying for their parents. Is that, Illinois does not have that. We are not that state, okay? So your children are not responsible for your end of life medical bills or anything like that. I think that's what the question was asking.
Thank you. I also think it's important to mention, as you were talking about documents and having powers of attorney and everything that you needed in place for everyone. But I think it's important to mention also that often, I think, depending on age, I have several clients who say, oh, I've put my oldest son's name on my house. I've put my oldest son's name on my checking account, not as just as a signer, but a joint. And there can be a lot of difficulties doing that. And people don't realize that, because I think in years gone by, years ago, I think that was pretty prevalent. That's what people did. Would you want to speak on that a little bit? We have about 4 minutes.
Absolutely. I would strongly recommend not to for 2 reasons. They don't understand that you're putting them on as an owner, so that means ownership. So upon your death, that house goes to whoever is left on title. So if your intent was to distribute it amongst all your children or all of your beneficiaries, that's not going to happen. It's going to go to that person because they own it. The other problem with that is that it also increases the liability, because then it's something they own. So if something happens, they're in a car accident or somebody sues them, you've increased your liability. So we strongly recommend not to do. That's not one of the reasons why the trust can be so helpful, because it allows for that management, but also protects from against that liability, those liability issues.
And I think also what has happened, I've had a couple of clients that essentially that's been the case. And then the parent has ended up really depleting their funds and going on to Medicaid. And now Medicaid comes back, and this is like a whole nother issue, but looks at that as another issue.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Ownership on your side. We have some other questions. Let's see. Do you recommend a single agent or co-agents for powers of attorney for healthcare?
You're going to use the statutory forms, which is what I recommend. They are not allowed. Co-agency is not allowed in the state of Illinois. Doesn't mean that it's not allowed in other states, but it's not allowed in Illinois under the statutory form. And again, remember that these documents are to be used for third parties to deal with the people that you've named. So again, if you've got 2 people and they don't agree, then we've got nothing. Then it's worthless, because that's what the third party is looking to do, is to rely on that person. So it sort of defeats the purpose of the document. So besides it not being allowed in Illinois, I wouldn't recommend it anyway.
Thank you. We have another question. I have a power of attorney form with my will. Do I need to go back to the attorney who drew up the will about 10 years ago to draw up a living will or advance direction? directives, I'm sorry.
No, you do not. No, any attorney could be well, what I would recommend is that you work with an elder law attorney, just because we're a little more sensitive to the issues that may involve disability and dementia and that sort of thing, rather than just strictly focusing on passing on wealth. So just a little, I mean, that would just be my recommendation.
And this is also, I think our last question, but a very good one. I am power of attorney for my sister and a former employee, and I'm also turning 80 this year. I'm concerned about my own capacity. What would be a good next step?
Reach out to the wonderful question. Reach out to the one that asked you to be that person. And if there's a second person, you can fill out a resignation form so that when and if that power of attorney needs to be used, what's going to happen is that third party is going to look at it. They're going to see your name on it. And if you have a resignation, then they're going to very easily, very practically go to the next person. So you would want to reach out to your principal, the person that asked you to be that person, and have that discussion with them. And if there isn't another person, then make sure that you let them know that, and then they can do a new one.
Thank you. I think that was an excellent question. So Mary Kay, thank you very much. If you can just stay on for 1 minute. And thank you to everyone that joined us today. And we appreciate it. Have a great day. You'll be receiving an evaluation via email from our office, from ElderWorks. Again, as you know, we're here to help you. Any form that you need, we can certainly give you any resource and referrals. And Mary Kay at AZ Health and Elder Law and her staff are always available to help you also. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to call you right back, Mary Kay.
Carol, you know what? I have to run. I've got a 1:30.
Okay, I'll send you an email. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.